The council chamber was silent, but not with peace. It was the kind of silence that came just before a storm broke. Hundreds of alien delegations watched with unblinking eyes, their strange faces catching the gleam of the starlight flooding through the transparent dome above. They had gathered here for one purpose: to deliver their demand to Earth, and to make sure humanity bent the knee. But Earth hadn't sent an army. It hadn't even sent its president, generals, or admirals. Instead, they had sent her. Ambassador Celine Vera stepped onto the circular speaking platform in the middle of the chamber, her black uniform trimmed with the deep blue of Earth's diplomatic corps. She was small by comparison to most of the towering alien species present, barely 5.5 feet tall, slim, human. A creature most of them would have ignored on any other day. Yet when she raised her eyes, she carried herself like someone who had already seen storms and refused to bow to them. The council's presiding voice thundered across the dome, amplified by hidden resonators. Humanity must accept unconditional surrender. Effective immediately. Gasps, rattles, hisses, every alien delegate added their agreement in their own way. Some slammed clawed hands against tables, others flared bioluminescent stripes, and a few pulsed pheromones so thick the air shimmered. The demand was clear: Earth must yield, abandon its fleets, and hand its colonies over to more responsible guardians. Celine tilted her head, her dark hair falling slightly across her face, and said calmly, almost conversationally, "No." The chamber erupted like a detonated star. "No?" The presiding voice rumbled, as though uncertain it had translated correctly. Its owner, a being of glassy crystal shards known as a Zathis, flickered light across its facets in a pulse of disbelief. "You misunderstand, human. This is not a negotiation. This is a declaration. Surrender, or face the united wrath of the Council's armadas." Celine didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. In her mind, she thought of the moment 3 days earlier when she had stood in the United Earth Assembly chamber, surrounded by military officials, scientists, and citizens who had survived decades of skirmishes with alien powers. The Council had warned Earth repeatedly: stop expanding, stop colonizing, stop mining asteroids in protected zones. Earth had ignored them. Why? Because survival was not a luxury for humanity, it was instinct. When the final demand of surrender had been broadcast, Earth's leaders had turned to Celine. She had been chosen not because she was the most senior diplomat, but because she was the most unshakable. Her father had been a soldier on the Mars front, her mother a refugee from the Titan blockade. Celine had grown up with the memory of hunger in her bones, and the sound of war always just over the horizon. And so, when the Council expected Earth to come crawling, Celine had stepped forward and said, "Send me." Now, she stood in the chamber of the most powerful interstellar coalition in known space, every species expecting her to crumble under the weight of their threats. Instead, she leaned forward on the platform railing and spoke with the clarity of a hammer striking steel. "You've spent centuries trying to tame us. Colonies restricted. Technology embargoed. Trade sabotaged. And now you demand surrender? Tell me, when in human history have we ever surrendered because someone told us to?" Her voice carried, not just because of the chamber's amplifiers, but because she said it with something the aliens didn't have: conviction. A delegate from the Ryler, hulking reptilians with obsidian-scale armor, slammed his talons down. "You cannot win against us. We number in the trillions, our fleets stretch across thousands of systems. Humanity is a child's race playing with weapons it barely understands." Celine smiled faintly, a dangerous expression. "Funny. Every empire that's underestimated us has said the same thing. Do you want me to recite the list?" Murmurs rippled through the chamber. She remembered what her father used to tell her as a girl: when someone stronger tries to break you, don't fight where they expect. Fight where they can't understand. And that's exactly what she was doing. The Council hadn't expected resistance. They had expected trembling excuses, maybe a desperate plea for mercy. What they got instead was a woman whose very presence felt like a challenge. Celine raised a hand and pointed upward, toward the dome's view of the stars. "Do you see that? That's not just emptiness to us. That's home. Every point of light is a place we'll go, a place we'll fight to keep. You think Earth stands alone here? Look again. As if on cue, her wrist console vibrated with a secure pulse. Earth Command had sent her the signal. She tapped the display. The dome's holographic system flickered to life, projecting an image in the center of the chamber. Dozens of human ships, sleek and angular, sliding from the dark of deep space into formation. The markings on their hulls were unmistakable, Earth Fleet. But more shocking than their presence was their location. They weren't at the edge of the system. They were right behind the Council's armada. Gasps turned into roars of outrage. The presiding voice pulsed hard enough to crack its crystalline surface. You dare threaten the Council in its own chamber? Celine's answer was soft, but sharp enough to cut steel. No. I'm reminding you what happens when you demand humanity kneel. We don't kneel. Not now. Not ever. The chamber descended into chaos. Some delegates shouted for immediate war, others hissed in fear. A few began calculating whether Earth's audacity meant hidden allies. Celine stood in the storm, calm, knowing every word she had spoken would be carried back to Earth within minutes. Because this wasn't just defiance. This was a message. Humanity would not surrender. And Earth had agreed. The chamber's silence broke like glass when the envoy slammed his clawed hand onto the negotiation table. The force rippled through the holographic maps floating between the delegates, sending the glowing constellations into a chaotic swirl. His scales shimmered with agitation, a violent shade of orange that made half the council flinch. You mock the authority of the Galactic Council, human! His words came out half roar, half snarl. You think your small, fragile world can defy the weight of 10,000 systems? You think Earth stands outside the law of the stars? Elara didn't blink. She sat perfectly still, hands folded, chin lifted just slightly to meet the envoy's venom with calm defiance. The council chamber was engineered to intimidate, colossal arches of polished obsidian, banners of conquered empires hanging in neat symmetry, guards bristling with ceremonial blades. But she acted like she was sitting at a cafe back on Earth. No, she replied, voice even. I think your law is built on fear. And I don't recognize fear as law. That simple sentence landed harder than a fleet bombardment. The delegates murmured, whispered translations hissing across the chamber, translators working overtime to capture the exact nuance of her words. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't stood. But the refusal hung heavy in the air, undeniable. Counselor Urix, one of the insectoid races whose kind once enslaved whole planets before joining the council, leaned forward. His mandibles clicked impatiently as he spoke. Your defiance is noted, human. But understand what it means. Refusal is war. Refusal is annihilation. You cannot. We can. Elara cut in, sharp as a blade. Her eyes flicked over the council, scanning them one by one, as if daring them to interrupt her again. And we already have. A ripple of unease passed through the chamber. She tapped a control on her wristband. Instantly, the holographic starfield reorganized itself. The neat maps of council-controlled territories were replaced by new projections, Earth colonies, scattered, growing, connected by lines of travel and trade. They glowed brighter than the council's map, pulsing with life and expansion. This, she said, her voice carrying effortlessly, is the galaxy you don't want to admit exists. Earth is not some backwater species you can bully into submission. We're explorers. Builders. Survivors. Every system you threaten to isolate us from, we've already charted alternate paths. Every embargo you planned, we've already compensated for with our own industries. Every fleet you think can intimidate us, we've already studied, dissected, and found weaknesses in. Her words echoed with steel. The maps shifted again, now showing military schematics, human-designed starships lined up beside council cruisers. On paper, the human fleet was small. Laughably so. But then, side by side, the stats didn't align with what the council expected. Human ships were smaller, lighter, but faster. More maneuverable. Built with efficiency the council had never needed to consider because they'd always relied on size and overwhelming numbers. "You're bluffing," the envoy snarled, though there was hesitation in his tone now. Alara raised an eyebrow. "Am I?" As if on cue, the chamber lights flickered. A soft chime rang through the delegates' translation devices. And then a voice, calm and unmistakably human, filled the chamber. "This is Fleet Admiral Soren of the Earth Defense Initiative. To the Galactic Council, we stand by our ambassador. Threaten Earth again, and you'll learn just how far we'll go to defend our own." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the guards shifted uneasily, glancing toward the vaulted ceiling as if a human warship might tear it open at any second. Alara let the silence stretch, let their imaginations fill the void. Then she leaned back in her chair and smiled faintly. "War is your language," she said softly. "But Earth doesn't need war to win. We only need to endure. And endurance," she let her gaze sweep over them, "is what humans do best." Outside the chamber, the corridors buzzed with chaos. News feeds exploded across the galaxy. Earth refuses the treaty. Human envoy threatens the council. War inevitable. In the quieter corner of the observation decks, Alara finally allowed herself a deep breath. Her aide, a young lieutenant named Imani, jogged to catch up. "Ambassador." Imani's voice cracked with both fear and awe. By every regulation, that was treason. You just defied the most powerful coalition in the galaxy. They could execute you. They could try," Alara said, her tone casual. Then she softened, seeing the panic in Imani's eyes. "Listen. The council needed to hear that someone wouldn't bow. They needed to be reminded that conquest isn't inevitable. And most of all, Earth needed to see it. Do you understand?" Imani hesitated. "You mean, you did it for the broadcast feeds?" "Not just that," Alara said, turning to the vast windows overlooking the star-dotted void. "But yes. Humanity has to see one of their own refusing. It's not just about me or the Council. It's about showing Earth we're not helpless. That when the galaxy demands surrender, we don't cave." For a moment, silence lingered between them. Then Imani asked the question hanging heavy in the air. "What if they call the bluff?" Alara's lips pressed together in a thin line. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she watched a distant freighter gliding through the void, its human markings glinting against the starlight. "They'll test us," she admitted finally. "That's what predators do. But when they come, they'll find out we're not prey." And test them, the Council did. Within days, probes disappeared near human colonies. Trade routes were harassed by unmarked vessels that everyone knew were Council-funded. Satellites flickered offline in the Sol system. Skirmishes broke out at the fringes of controlled space. The Council was probing, needling, searching for a weakness. Earth didn't flinch. For every probe that vanished, humans launched 2 more. For every trade ship harassed, human escorts intervened with unexpected ferocity. For every satellite jammed, humans deployed redundancies the Council hadn't anticipated. It was a chess match, one move after another, escalation on both sides. But then came the strike that changed everything. A human colony, Erivos Prime, barely established, only 5 years old, was attacked outright. The Council denied involvement, of course. But the evidence was undeniable: orbital bombardment scars, survivors' testimony, fragments of Council-built weapons. Erivos Prime burned. And that was when Earth decided enough was enough. Alara stood at the foot of the United Earth Assembly, thousands of voices raised in fury, grief, and determination. The broadcast carried her words across every colony, every ship, every settlement where humanity had planted its fragile roots. "They thought we would surrender," she told them, her voice carrying like thunder. "They thought our refusal was a bluff. They thought we would bow after one act of terror." She paused, scanning the crowd, the billions listening beyond. "But they forgot who we are. Humanity has never survived by bowing. We have survived by standing. And today, we stand together." The roar that followed shook the very foundation of the assembly. For the first time, Earth wasn't just reacting. Humanity was preparing to fight back. The chambers shook with the sound of outrage. Senators, delegates, and warlords pounded their tables, their voices rising in a storm of accusations. Threats mixed with promises of annihilation, and through it all, Captain Alara Vey sat silent, her hands folded neatly on the polished stone before her. It would have been easier to give in, to apologize, retract her words, and let Earth fade back into quiet obscurity. But that was no longer an option. The galaxy had seen the spark. It had seen the fire ignite. If she faltered now, it would not be just Earth that burned. It would be the truth itself, stamped out under 1,000 alien boots. The Chancellor of the Dominion leaned forward, his scaled fingers curling into talons. You bring us no fleet, no banners, no proof of force. And yet you dare spit in the face of this council? Humans, your kind has always been reckless, primitive, stubborn. This time, your insolence will see your planet reduced to dust. Alara's lips twitched into a smile, not of humor, but of recognition. He had no idea how close to truth he already was. Before she could respond, a booming voice cut through the air. Admiral Kale, the human fleet commander, entered the chamber. His uniform was crisp, but there was nothing ceremonial about him. He walked with the weight of battle in every step. Every alien in the hall had heard whispers of the Ghost Admiral, the one who'd fought against impossible odds at Vega's Rift and walked away with his fleet intact. Kale stopped beside Alara, his voice a growl. Say the word, Captain, and I'll show them dust. The chamber erupted again. Aliens snarled and shouted, terrified yet eager to mask it behind arrogance. But Alara lifted her hand, silencing Kale. She stood, her chair sliding back with a sharp scrape that cut through the noise. No, she said, her voice steady as stone. That is exactly what they want, to believe that all we are is violence. To believe that we cannot stand for anything greater. But we do. We stand for choice. We stand for sovereignty. And Earth will not be another pawn in your empires, nor will we bow to threats. Her words hung in the air, suspended like the edge of a blade. The Dominion Chancellor sneered. Then you condemn yourself. Your Earth will be first to fall when the fleets mobilize. Mobilize? Alara's voice dropped, quiet but cutting. Your fleets are already mobilized. Don't think we haven't seen the movements at the borders. You pretend this treaty was a chance for peace, but you had war in your hearts before we ever stepped foot here. For a heartbeat, the chamber stilled. The truth was dangerous. The truth was undeniable. Then came the breaking point. The ceiling lights dimmed as a vast hologram burst to life above the council chamber. Stars mapped themselves across the void, systems lighting up in red where Dominion fleets were massed. Data scrolled across the projection, ships, weapon counts, formations, all stolen from the Dominion's own encrypted channels. A cold murmur rippled through the assembly. Someone had breached the unbreachable. Someone had stolen what no one dared touch. The projection ended, leaving silence in its wake. It was Alara's turn to sneer. That is what you call peace. The Chancellor staggered back, his eyes wide with something that looked very much like fear. The Dominion's allies shifted uncomfortably. And across the chamber, for the first time, voices of doubt rose among the smaller civilizations. But fear is a dangerous animal. Corner it, and it strikes. Enough! The Chancellor roared. If you will not sign, then Earth will be destroyed. Right here. Right now. The chamber doors exploded inward. Dozens of armored Dominion soldiers stormed in, weapons primed, forming a wall of death aimed directly at Alara. The delegates recoiled, some gasping, others smirking. Kale moved first, stepping in front of her, his sidearm already drawn. The humans had always been underestimated, but not today. The soldiers opened fire. Bolts of plasma seared through the air, scorching the stone pillars. Kale dove, pulling Alara with him, as the council chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates screamed. Some ducked behind shields, others fled outright. But Earth's representatives did not run. Kale fired with terrifying precision, dropping 3 soldiers before their boots even cleared the doorway. Elara rolled to cover, snatching a discarded rifle from the floor. The weight was alien, the balance wrong, but war didn't wait for comfort. "Kale!" she shouted over the din. "We can't win this here." He didn't look back, his jaw set like iron. "Then we don't win. We survive." Grenades clattered across the floor. Kale grabbed Elara, dragging her behind the heavy council table as the blast shook the chamber, showering them in shards of molten stone. "Admiral," Elara said, breathless. "Call them in." Kale's eyes burned. "Are you certain?" She nodded once. "If they want to see Earth's strength, let them see it." Kale touched his calm. His words were a whisper, but they carried the weight of thunder. "All units, execute Iron Dawn." Outside the council chamber, the stars themselves seemed to move. From the shadow of the system's gas giant, a dozen human warships decloaked, black holes gleaming like knives. They weren't the largest ships in the galaxy, nor the most advanced, but they were different. Leaner. Hungrier. Built not for intimidation, but survival. Built by a species that had clawed its way up from a death world where everything tried to kill them. The human fleet surged forward. On the council floor, Dominion soldiers suddenly froze as alarms screeched in their helmets. Fleet command was screaming in their ears. The humans had surrounded them. The hunters had become the prey. Elara stood tall again, her rifle lowered, her voice ringing clear over the chaos. "You came here thinking Earth would kneel. You came here thinking fear was enough. You were wrong. You don't know humanity. You don't know what it means when we say no." Kale's voice thundered beside her. "The Council will remember this day, not as the day Earth surrendered, but the day Earth chose war on its own terms." The Dominion soldiers hesitated. Some faltered. And in that hesitation, the chamber itself trembled. The walls split open as human marines stormed in, armored in black and steel, weapons raised, their visors reflecting firelight. They moved like a single organism, brutal and precise, cutting down the Dominion's strike force in minutes. Delegates gaped, horrified and awed, as the battle ended as swiftly as it had begun. Smoke curled toward the ceiling. The Dominion soldiers lay broken across the chamber floor. And at the center stood Elara, Kale, and their marines. The galaxy had wanted to test humanity's resolve. It had just received its answer. Elara raised her chin, her gaze sweeping across every trembling delegate. "Tell your fleets. Tell your empires. Tell your worlds. Earth does not bow. We do not beg. And if you demand surrender—" She paused, her voice like cold steel. "You will only find resistance." The silence that followed was deeper than any scream. And in that silence, the galaxy shifted. The chamber was silent, but silence had weight in the council's hall. It wasn't empty stillness. It was a battlefield in which every species present measured the worth of another with their silence. They weren't merely waiting for Lyra to speak, they were waiting to see whether Earth had the courage to match her defiance with action. The Galactic Council's Supreme Marshal, a hulking creature of steel grafted to scaled flesh, shifted first. His claws tapped the dais, each scrape echoing like a sword dragged across stone. His voice carried, heavy and sharpened. "You reject unity. You reject survival. Then you embrace extinction." The words rippled like thunder, but Lyra didn't blink. Behind her, the Earth delegation didn't falter either. Some clenched fists under the table, some exhaled slowly, but none lowered their eyes. And then the stars outside the Council's vast window, stars that had glittered coldly through every negotiation, shifted. No one could have noticed at first, except those who knew what to look for. Ships. Not alien ships. Not Council warships. Human ships. They weren't massive compared to the fleets gathered in orbit. They weren't ornate or over-engineered like the Praxian cruisers or the Valen dreadnoughts. They were angular, lean, armored like predators whose very existence depended on efficiency. Their hulls bore scars of meteors, plasma burns, and wars fought on worlds no alien had ever set foot on. The feed across every display lit up at once. Unified Earth Command Signal. Transmission. Stand your ground. The council chamber erupted. Voices of outrage, fear, disbelief. Some called it madness. Others whispered that it was courage. The marshal slammed a clawed fist into the dais, shattering part of the crystalline surface. You dare bring your fleet here? Do you mean to wage war on the council itself? Lyra's reply was calm, but not cold. It was the calm of someone who had already chosen the battlefield and accepted the price. No. We don't want war. We never did. But we will not kneel. You demanded surrender, demanded that Earth lay down its spirit. That's something you'll never have. Not from me. Not from humanity. The marshal's throat flared with a violent glow. His race was bred for war, and his species had annihilated civilizations without a second thought. He leaned close to the edge of the dais, as though he could crush Lyra through will alone. Do you think your tiny world, your fragile ships, can defy the combined might of all civilizations present here? Lyra finally smiled. It wasn't arrogance. It was defiance laced with a strange, quiet joy. We don't need to be stronger. We just need to be human. And that has always been enough. The words carried farther than any shout. From the council's edge, another alien ambassador rose. A shrill creature from the SCI Dominion, its body flickering with neon bioluminescence, screamed. Do you not see? They bring war to us all. Strike them down before their madness spreads. But others hesitated. Some species remembered humanity's record. The battles they had survived against predators that had wiped out colonies. The plagues they had endured and beaten. The unyielding way they stood when no one else would. Seeds of doubt. Seeds of awe. The marshal slammed the decision down. Then it is war. Humanity is outlawed. All present will commit to their eradication. Outside, fleets began to move. Inside, Lyra leaned forward over the dais. Her eyes locked with the marshal's. Then know this, you will not be fighting a people desperate to survive. You will be fighting a people who choose freedom, even if it means fire. The chamber's shields flared as the first tremors of energy discharged in orbit. Human ships were smaller, but they didn't wait for permission. They didn't wait for advantage. They struck first. Not with planet killers or sun disruptors, but with precision. Engines disabled. Sensors blinded. Drives destabilized. Where alien doctrine favored overwhelming force, humans favored cutting the sinews, making giants stumble. The council fleets reeled. Inside the chamber, chaos broke out. Delegates screamed. Some fled. Others demanded unity. But Lyra didn't move. She stood as Earth's voice while the universe tilted into war outside. The marshal's eyes burned like dying stars. You've doomed your people. Lyra's voice was steady. No. We've reminded them who they are. The hall shook as another fleet's drive detonated in orbit, but the humans weren't annihilating. They were choosing. Each strike was calculated, controlled, like a warning carved into flesh without taking the life. The message was clear. We fight because we must, not because we want. Delegates began whispering something new now, something none had dared before. If humanity can resist the council, why can't we? That was the shift. That was the contagion. It wasn't ships or weapons. It was the refusal to bow. And the council knew it. The marshal finally bared his fangs and raised his claws. Then Earth will burn first. And you, he pointed at Lyra, claws trembling with rage. You will be remembered as the one who led your kind to ruin. Lyra didn't flinch. She glanced toward the viewport where human ships danced like wolves circling larger, slower prey. Then back at the marshal. Or maybe, she said softly, I'll be remembered as the one who reminded Earth we never asked permission to live. The words cut deeper than any blade. The chamber shook again, not from war, but from something else. One of the council's fleets had just broken rank. Not against humanity, but against the marshal's command. A splinter faction. Another soon followed. Seeds of rebellion sprouting in real time. The marshal's command fractured. His voice roared through the chamber, trying to hold power as it slipped between his claws. And Lyra stood unmoving, the storm whirling around her. The truth was plain: Earth had not defeated the Council militarily. They had done something more dangerous. They had shown every world that surrender wasn't the only option. That saying, no, was still possible. By the time the Council realized it, it was too late. Outside, the fleets split. Some still pressed against human ships with ferocity. Others hesitated. Some defected outright. The war the Marshal declared had not united the galaxy, it had broken it. Lyra finally turned to her delegation. "We've done what we came for. Now we survive the storm." One of her aides, pale and shaking, whispered, "What if they crush us anyway?" Lyra's eyes stayed on the stars, where human ships blazed their refusal across the void. "Then we'll die standing. And that will be enough." The aide swallowed. But there was no fear left, only fire. And as the council chamber devolved into a storm of chaos, Lyra realized something else. Humanity hadn't just refused surrender. They had redefined the battlefield. War would come, yes. The price would be heavy. But the galaxy would never again believe that surrender was inevitable. And when the histories were written, whether in blood or ink, one line would remain. The galaxy demanded surrender. She said no, and Earth agreed.